I know a place where dreams are born and time is never planned. Oh, hi! Oh, good. I'm glad you let yourself in. I left the door unlocked while I ran to the store to pick up a few more things for dinner. Let me pour you some wine. Oh, good. You helped yourself. Breathe, Frank. Breathe. Here, let me join you. I feel as jumbled as that traffic I just left. I know this is going to sound crazy, but have you ever thought about what it would be like to die? No, really. I know it sounds so odd to want to talk about. Most people don't want to talk about it unless they're the ones who are, See, I can't even bring myself to say the word. It's like it would, I don't know, open the door, send an invitation to you know who to come on over and do you know what. No, I'm not depressed. I've just been thinking a lot about death lately. It all started a couple of weeks ago. I was sitting having my morning coffee, rubbing my eyes, trying to wake up. And so I'm watching one of those early morning, TV talk shows, and they're interviewing this woman who's talking about how you can improve the quality of your life. Like you can do that in just 2 minutes. Anyway, she's talking about how one of the most stressful times in life is just before someone passes. There are all these questions, regrets, baggage that's never been talked about, and it all gets dumped out on the table like a pile of laundry, only some of it's clean and some of it's dirty, and you go sorting through it to find that one thing that you're looking for. Oh, here's my self-respect. Oh, so that's why I'm so self-conscious. Now the truth comes out. And once you find what you're looking for, well, you put everything back in that bag and you just close it up. So that this moment doesn't become too crazy, she suggested that you write your own obituary. Yeah. Or that of your spouse or a parent. Can you imagine? 7:10 in the morning, coffee mug in one hand, rubbing my eyes with the other, and they want me to think about all this? Like thinking about this right now is going to improve the quality of my life? Oh, I don't think so. Have a little bit more wine, Frank. Oh, this is good. My grandmother. Sometimes I wonder if it wasn't easier for them. Her generation. I'm not being sexist or anti-feminist hell, gay meant happy back then. It's just that in some ways by having, fewer choices or options, it seemed to make their life more grounded, closer to the real things that make a life. My nanny and my grandfather, they got on a boat and they traveled 3,000 miles across the open sea to come to a place where they knew no one and didn't speak the language. I can't even wrap my mind around that. I made sure that when I took my first trip overseas, it was to a country where I could speak the language. So I went to London in 1985 on People's Express. Actually, my first trip to a foreign country was to Canada. I was 14. It was a CYO trip to Montreal, climbing steps on my knees for some pilgrimage to some church. See, that's what I'm talking about. The literalness of that event. Knees on a hard stone step, saying a prayer on each one. Hail Mary and Our Father, till we got to the top of, what was it? St. Joseph's Oratory. That's the kind of groundedness that I'm talking about. She used to garden. My father would edge it for her and then turn over the earth, but after that, she took over. She would spread the manure, she would plant the seeds, she would weed and water. And then in the summer, she would make this, what I'm preparing right now. Crisp Italian bread, olive oil, crushed black pepper, and then the juice from a ripe tomato. Growing up, I was afraid of her. She intimidated me. I don't remember her smiling, if ever, at all. She wore high black tie shoes, nylons, even in the summer, a paisley or a print dress with a white ruffled collar that buttoned all the way up the front with short sleeves. Her white hair was all pulled back in a bun. That's the way she dressed, even when she was in the garden. And her hands and her arms, oh, she was strong. When she grabbed you when you were doing something that you shouldn't, oh boy, you never did that again. But when she made this, the tomato and the olive oil on the Italian bread, oh, it was like a moment of softness. You know, it's hard enough trying to see the world through the eyes of a 50-something-year-old, but trying to see the world through the eyes of a shy, sensitive, overweight, 11-year-old bookish boy? What did I know? What do I know? Now I know that how incredibly brave she and my grandfather were to get on a boat and travel 3,000 miles across the ocean to come to a place where they knew one and didn't speak the language. Well, I guess that's where I get my wanderlust. My brother Marky, too. But my parents, though, oh, they're really rooted here. Well, actually, my mother is. My father, maybe because he served in the army and was overseas during the war, he was always ready to move. It was my mother who never wanted to leave Rhode Island, which, well, let's just say it caused numerous arguments between she and my father, who wanted to move first to Florida and then later to Las Vegas. I mean, my brother and I, we've been all over. I've been to Europe. He's been to the Pacific and South America with the Merchant Marine. But growing up, I never knew that my parents had any friends at all. I mean, our whole life revolved around the family. It wasn't until I moved away that I had to form my own family with my friends, my gay friends. We had to make our own community. We weren't born into a family. We had to fashion one. We had to nurture it and tend it like my grandmother's garden. She died when I was 13. I think that's when all this began, my fear of death. It's a really beautiful Saturday in May. It's really, really nice out. And I'm at my Boy Scout patrol meeting. I'm in Troop 2 Knightsville, and our troop meets every Wednesday night. And on once a month, our patrols, we get together for a meeting where we learn things and stuff. So we're at Charlie's garage, and we're having a meeting, and then after we're done, I'm walking home. But before I leave from my meeting, my mom comes home from the hospital where she went to see my nanny. She's been in there for, I don't know, a couple of weeks sick. But my mom said that she'll be coming home soon. Well, not today, but soon. Before I left for my meeting, my mom came home and she said that she saw Nani, and she said she looked better. In fact, I asked the nurse, and she told me that Ma was sitting up in her chair, and when she asked her why, she said, "I'm waiting for my daughter. I'm going home this afternoon." So yay, Nani will be coming home. Now, I love my Nani, but sometimes I'm scared at her sometimes, because if I do something she doesn't like, she just sort of stands there and stares at me, or she turns her back and walks away and doesn't say a thing, not a word, just total quiet. And so before I know it, I start to cry, and I run to her and I say, "I'm sorry." For what I don't even know sometimes, only that I don't want her to not talk to me. So I say, "I'm sorry," so everything will be better. Anyway, I'm really happy that she's coming home. So I'm walking back from my scout meeting, and I'm walking down Wayland Avenue. It's one of my favorite streets. It's this long, straight street with these really tall trees that sort of reach up and over, and they touch at the top, and it makes like a tunnel, and it's really cool because I feel like I'm being transported. Beam me up, Scotty, to some strange and faraway place just by walking down the street. Anyway, I'm walking down Wayland Avenue, and I'm getting ready to cross the street to my Auntie Lena's house. She lives at the corner of Wayland Avenue and Grape Street, right near where we live, and all of a sudden I notice all the cars of my aunts and uncles all around her house. It's Saturday afternoon. It's sunny. There are no birthdays. What are they all doing here? The sight sort of stops me right there on Mr. Fabrizio's grass, and so real slow, I begin to walk across the street. And as I get close to the screen door of my Auntie Lena's house, I can see my father, and I can see that he's crying, and he opens the door. See, my father never cries. I mean, that's one of the problems between us. I'm too sensitive, and he isn't at all, till now. So when I see that he's crying, I start to cry. And then he opens the door, and he says to me, "Nani's dead." I don't know. I wish there was a button that you could push, the button of life, so that, everything would just like pause and, I don't know, we could have a moment to breathe and to take a good look around and really take it all in and try to figure it out, your life, my life, and then, then say, okay, I'm ready now. We were all there for her, my parents, my aunts and uncles and cousins. But I wonder sometimes, who will be there for me when? Who will be with me when? Who will write my obit? The obits, the obituaries, the death notices. The dictionary defines obituary as the account of the life of a deceased person. So who will write mine? I mean, normally your children would do that for you, but as a single gay man, I don't have any children. I came along before surrogate mothers, before gay adoption, before the time when gay men could have children, unless we were sort of married first and came out later in life. But I find myself reading them now, the obits, at the age of 55. I don't know, maybe it is my age. I mean, getting AARP applications in the mail can do that to you. The obits. My parents, they read them every day. They have for as long as I can remember. I mean, up until recently, I have avoided them. I haven't even wanted to say the word. It's like I said, it's somehow like you're tempting the fates. Obits. I wonder what mine would be like. The account of the life of a deceased person. Well, not a life, my life. My life. The account of my life. Sounds so final, doesn't it? Like life is like some cosmic rendering of the importance, the value, the meaning of your life. My life. An account. Like life is an abacus, and all the things that we do and say, all the roads chosen and not chosen are all sort of added up and subtracted out, and what's left at the end is what? The sum total of a life. My life. So, no children to write it for me when I'm gone, no children to cry for me when I'm gone, so I've decided to give myself an accounting of my life. I mean, Socrates is reported by Plato to have said, the unexamined life is not worth living. So I've started to write my own obit, my obituary, the accounting of my life. That's what I wanted to share with you, sort of bounce off of you. Okay? Toady Jr., Frank V., passed away on. He was the loving husband of Stephen Pennell. Born in Cranston, Rhode Island, he was the son of Frank and Edith Pezzer Toady, brother of Mark Stephen Toady. Frank attended Cranston Public Schools, graduating from Cranston High School West in 1976. High school. Who knows? I don't know. Maybe things would have been different if I'd been an outside child. Me? I always stayed inside. I was either reading or watching TV or listening to my mother and my three aunts, the four of them, sitting around our dining room table on Saturdays over coffee and talking about people that they knew, happenings in Knightsville. I mean, that's where my mom's family lived growing up. Mark's outside playing, and my dad's doing something in the garage. He's always doing something in the garage. And Mommy sends me outside to get him when the coffee's ready. But I like to stand here next to the table and just listen to them, the four of them talking over coffee and. My Auntie Lena, she's the oldest. She reminds me of Sophia Loren with her accent and the way she wears her hair. She's really gentle with everybody. Don't tell anyone, but she's my favorite. Maybe it's because she lives right next door to us, and I go there every day after school. And then there's my Auntie Teresa. She's married to my Uncle Sal, and they live in the same house as my Auntie Nancy and Uncle Tony, only on the second floor. We never go to their house because my father says he's tight. My Auntie Nancy and my Uncle Tony, they live on the first floor, and my Uncle Tony, he likes to drink lots of beer on the weekends and when we're there on Friday nights. See, on Friday night, my parents go over and they play penny poker with Auntie Nancy and Uncle Tony and Auntie Lena and Auntie Teresa and my cousin Bobby. He's my Auntie Teresa's son. Uncle Tony, when he finishes his beer, he gives me the empty, and I get to go out in the back hall, and I get to put it away in this big cardboard box. It's got two flaps that lift up, and the bottle fits right in its own little slot. And then I go to the refrigerator, and I get him a new one. I get to do that because I'm older than Marky. We get pizza every Friday night from Nino's, and that's my favorite part, cheese and pepperoni pizza. So I stand around and I watch them play cards, but it gets boring. And so sometimes I bring a book to read, or Marky and we watch TV, but there's nothing on, and it's getting late, and I'm tired, but we don't leave till after 11 o'clock or even later. My cousin Bobby, he yells a lot when he loses, and my Uncle Tony, he likes to slam his hands on the table when my Auntie Nancy says to him, he's had enough, or she tells him to shut up because he's saying something in front of the kids that you don't say in public in front of other people. So many things we don't say in front of other people. Oh, boy, I learned that lesson really well. It made me into a listener instead of a talker. I know you wouldn't believe that listening to me going on now, but trust me, being in the closet, you're always afraid that something might slip. So you're always very careful about, sharing your thoughts. It was 5th grade. I was going through puberty. I remember having dreams at night of my 5th grade teacher, Mr. Mitchell, and these 2 boys, David and Richard. They were brothers in my class. Mr. Mitchell, he was really nice to me. He tried to prevent the boys from making fun of me. But it didn't always work. I mean, during recess, or even one day when 2 of them chased me home wanting to beat me up. So some of the boys, they're starting to talk about girls, and all I can think about is David and Richard. And somehow, I don't really understand how, but I come to realize that I'm different. And it's okay. I realize that it's okay for me to like boys. It's okay for me, but nobody else could know. I mean, I couldn't tell anyone else. They wouldn't understand, especially my parents. I mean, they would send me to a shrink and they would just mess up my head when all I really needed was just time to grow up. I remember saying to myself then that this was going to be really hard and it was going to hurt, but it was going to be okay. I remember one night, it had been such a hard day at school. The boys were really taunting me. I mean, even they could see that I was different. And all I wanted was for my mom just to give me a hug and to tell me that everything was going to be all right. So that night she heard me crying in bed. And she came into my room and she sat next to me and she said, "What's wrong, sweetheart? You can tell Mommy what's wrong." And the more that she tried to be sweet, the more she tried to comfort me, the more I cried. But I never said a word. I just kept crying. She sat with me till I stopped. And then she said, "Good night." And from that moment, an invisible wall went up between me and my mom and my dad. I wouldn't tell them. It would be many, many years till they would know. There are just some things you don't say in front of people. All right. Let's see. Where are we? Oh, all right. After graduating from Providence College in 1980, Frank moved to Washington, D.C. to attend graduate school at the Catholic University of America, where he received an M.A. in history. While living in D.C. during the 1980s, Frank worked on Capitol Hill for Representative Claudine Schneider, and later as a lobbyist for the National Federation of Independent Business. I had gone to D.C. for the first time, I think it was in junior high school. But the trip that really made the difference was a trip I made in my senior year in high school. It was on that trip that I decided I was going to move to D.C. I mean, I found it to be a really big city, but at the same time, kind of small. I mean, there weren't very many skyscrapers. On that trip, we learned that the city, that things couldn't be higher than the Washington Monument. So you could still see the sky, and there were lots of trees. It was a really pretty city. And this was the important thing. It had a gay neighborhood. Somehow I had found out about DuPont Circle, and I realized that there was a whole area of the city where gay people lived. I mean, not in hiding, but out in the open. So I knew that was the place for me. This was especially true after my 4 years at Providence College. PC, it was more like extended high school. I mean, I lived at home, I commuted, I was working part-time. And so while my friends in college had freedom, privacy, and they were away from parental eyes, I still had to live at home. And the struggle to accept my homosexuality was just getting more and more difficult. I mean, when I was 11, I came to realize I was different. And at that age, you don't really know what that means for your future. But as I grew into the future and it became the present, and I began to live in the world and read more about the world, I came to realize that surviving is a lot harder than it looked crying all those years ago in that bed. I had two girlfriends in high school, Gail and Leslie. I went to the winter ball with Gail. It's funny. I don't know how we met. I guess we were both in 10th grade. Anyway, I want to be kind here. Gail was a big girl. I don't know, there's just something about, gay men and big girls just sort of pairing up, becoming friends, even dating in those early years of coming out. I don't know, ask any gay man and they will tell you about the big girl in their life. Well, we dated for about 6 months and then it came to an end. And later, I started dating Leslie. And I really came to have real feelings for her. I mean, we even started talking about marriage. She was about a year younger than me, and as I said, we dated for about 3 years till I broke it off in the summer between my freshman and sophomore years at Providence College. See, from about 10th grade on, I had started having sex with my guy friends in the neighborhood, and I was doing this while I was dating Gail and dating Leslie. So as things got more serious with Leslie, I thought to myself, I can't live a lie. I'm gay, and I can't pretend to be someone that I'm not. I couldn't live a lie. I couldn't do that to Leslie, and I couldn't do that to me. I mean, I knew that I could live without a sexual relationship with a woman, but I also knew that I couldn't live without a sexual relationship with a man. I mean, I would end up cheating on her, which I was actually already doing at the time, so I ended it. And so that summer when we broke up, it was really hard because I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't tell her the real reason why I was breaking up with her. I felt that would have been cruel. Well, anyway, it's what I thought at the time, and I still think it was the right decision. So in addition to having sex with my male friends, I started finding out where the gay bars were, and I started going out to them. But the challenge of trying to keep everything a secret, so to speak, was getting more and more difficult, so I really couldn't. I didn't make any gay friends. I tried once. His name was, Paul or John. Interestingly enough, he liked to do drag. He was Italian and his family was from Silver Lake, which is where my dad grew up. So I thought I could just sort of, slip it in under the wire. But my parents, where did you meet him? Do you two go to school together? What do you do together? So many questions. So, this was the time in my life when I was in fear of my father. So I didn't want to raise any suspicions. Stonewall had happened in 1969. And so there was a little bit more in the papers about homosexuality then. Not a lot more, but more than there had ever been. I remember I was watching a ABC TV movie in 1972 called That Certain Summer. It was about a homosexual relationship between a younger man and an older man. Hal Holbrook played the older man and Martin Sheen played the younger man. So my dad's sitting in his chair reading the paper like he did every night when he came home, and my mom's doing laundry and ironing, and so I keep the volume turned down low, and I'm sitting close to the TV, but not too close, because I didn't want to raise any suspicion on the part of my father, who would put his paper down and ask what was on TV and start watching it. I was reading in the papers about kids being thrown out of their house by their parents for coming out, for being gay, and while I didn't think that would ever happen to me, I didn't want to take any chances, so I couldn't. I didn't make any gay friends. So the struggle between living in the closet and wanting to burst out of the closet, it became so challenging and so difficult that the only way that I found that I could deal with the stress and fear of it was to smoke lots and lots of dope that summer and straight into the fall semester of my sophomore year at PC. At the beginning of that fall semester, I was smoking, I don't know, like 6 or 7 times a day. I'd get up in the morning and I'd head out to school, but first I would stop at Mashantucket Lake, which was right near our house, and I'd get high before I went to school. And then I'd get high between classes, and then I'd get high after classes, and I'd get high after supper. I mean, I was going through like an ounce a week. I was so dulled and clouded by all the dope that I was smoking that one day, while I was driving on Park Avenue, the stereo was blasting in the car. I didn't even see the ambulance that was right on my ass. I mean, it was right up to my bumper. When I happened to look up and see it in my rearview mirror, all I could see were the letters B-U-L-A-N. I couldn't see the am or the ants. I was like, the traffic was stopped in both directions. I was holding the ambulance up, so I just pulled over, it sped by, and I was like, fuck. So I pulled into the parking lot of the bank or the gas station that was on the corner. I was so shaken. I said to myself, Frank, you were so totally out of control. You didn't even know there was an ambulance behind you. You didn't hear the sirens. You didn't see the lights. My God. And that's when I knew. I knew that I had to take control back of my life. And so I decided that I would stop smoking dope. So I quit cold turkey. It was right around Thanksgiving. I mean, my grades dropped that fall, of course. I wasn't studying, I was cutting class. I don't think I would have flunked out. I don't think my grades were that bad, but they would have been far, far worse if a really sad, sad thing hadn't happened. Just before exams were to start that December, there was a fire at Providence College. 7 girls died in the dorm rooms at Aquinas Hall from their Christmas decorations catching on fire. It was so sad. I mean, I didn't know any of them. But the next day they canceled exams and they sent us home for the holidays. And I couldn't stop thinking that in some way, somehow my life had been saved because they had died. In late January, we had our exams for that fall semester. And while I passed and I had C's and B's, I know my grades would have been a whole lot worse if I had had to take them back in December. For years later, I thought about that. In the mid-2000s, PC, they built a new chapel on campus, St. Dominic's Chapel. And the dedication mass for the chapel was going to be in honor of those 7 women. I went. I don't think I had been on campus, I don't know, since I had graduated in 1980, but I went. I felt I owed it to them, to their memory, that somehow my life was better. How hard it is to even talk about it to this day. I'm not being egotistical. I mean, it's just a fact that my life changed because they died. So that became another one of those things that I couldn't talk about in front of other people because then I would have had to explain everything that had been going on with me. So when I graduated from Providence College, I decided that going to Catholic University for a degree in history was my way out of Rhode Island. Looking back, I shouldn't have gone. I mean, my head wasn't in it. I was acting more like a first-year freshman right out of high school than a college graduate with a BA. I mean, I was drinking with my friends in the Rathskeller on campus every night and sleeping right through Latin class. Well, I applied, I was accepted, and off I went. I remember my mom drove me down in August to D.C., and my Auntie Lena, my Uncle Johnny came along. It was late August, and it was the hottest summer that D.C. had had in 100 years. My father, he flew down on that weekend. He was still working then. I mean, he wouldn't retire for another, 6 or 7 years. I remember when he finally did retire, he and my brother Marky, they went on a road trip, they called it, to Las Vegas in California. I mean, they were gone for about, 2 or 3 weeks, and they went to Las Vegas and San Francisco and San Diego. I remember my father always talked about that trip because when they were in Las Vegas, he won about, I don't know, over $3,000. Now, I mean, in 1986, 1987, that was a really nice sum of money. Anyway, he talked about how when they were traveling, he would hide it in his sock. And then when they came home, he actually hid it in his kitty, as he called it. Now, I don't know why they call it a kitty, but I find that I've started to do that. I mean, I've started to save money for vacation, and I've put it in an envelope, which I hide in the, well, I can't tell you where it is, because then it wouldn't be a secret kitty now, would it? Oh, but growing up, I was afraid of my father. I mean, he was a physically strong man, and his presence filled the room, my God. And his voice, when he got angry, and he got angry a fair amount, I mean, he would sing out like an aria. Italian curse words flew with the greatest of ease. La vesa della sorella e vaffanculo! And lots of other things that I knew were not nice, and they made us all nervous. I mean, the three of us would sit around the table real quiet, and the sound from his voice would make the doorbell chimes ring, and I would start laughing because I got nervous. And when I got nervous, I started to laugh, and my mother would say, "Don't laugh, you know it makes it worse." But I couldn't stop it. My father would say, "You think it's funny?" And I would shake my head no, but I was so scared. As a teenager, if I wanted something, I would ask my mother. And if she said, "Go ask your father," I would just forget about what it is that I wanted. I remember one time when I was about 15 or 16, I was getting ready to go out, and so I had just taken a shower, and for some reason I was doing like one thing in the bathroom, like, I don't know, brushing my teeth, and then I'd come back and do something else in my bedroom, like put on my socks, and then I'd go back into the bathroom and put on cologne, and so, I mean, it took me several trips of going back and forth to get dressed. And so I guess my father needed to use the bathroom. And so every time that he wanted to go in there, I was in there. And so finally he got so pissed, he yelled at me, "What are you, some kind of fucking French whore running in and out of the bathroom?" Well, you can imagine how that made me feel. I mean, I can laugh about it now, the absurdity of it. And then you wonder, how could they not know? Speaking of absurd, oh, listen to this one. It was right around the same time. I might have been about the same age or maybe a little younger. And it was talent night at my Boy Scout troop. So my friend Mark and I decided it would be great if I did a number from Godspell. Mark's a great piano player. We were in junior high school chorus together. So we thought that if I did "Turn Back, O Man, forswear thy foolish ways," that it would be perfect. So the Scoutmaster's wife helped me put together my outfit. A blonde wig, a two-piece red checkered dress. The skirt was floor length, a bare waist, a tube top, a red feather boa, and high heels. Well, everybody just about busted gut when I came out on stage. And I really worked it. I mean, I came down off the stage, and I'm wandering through the audience, and I decided to sit down in the lap of my friend Anthony's father, who I thought was cute. And I flirted with him a little bit, and then I came back on stage, I finished my song, and I got a great round of applause. And after, not a comment from anyone except for, "That was really funny," or "You were really good." I guess "Don't Ask, Don't Tell" was alive and well before it even had a name. Oh boy, I have gone way off track. Oh, wine flies. DC. So my father comes down, flies down for the weekend, and we do some sightseeing. And we're able to do that because my mom and my aunt and my uncle, they helped me put together my dorm room, get it all set up earlier in the week. So they were staying at, the Holiday Inn, right near Catholic University. It was in Northeast Washington, Brookland, and it wasn't really a safe area. I mean, it was a marginal working class neighborhood, and you really couldn't walk around at night. I mean, it was all very brightly lit because it was right down the street from the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. I mean, that's where my dorm was. It was at the end of this long street with these really tall trees with parks on both sides that led straight to the front door of the National Shrine. Anyway, we were having dinner that night, and the only nice restaurant in the entire neighborhood was Colonel Brooks Tavern. So that's where we ate every night. And my Uncle Johnny, he had carrot cake each night for dessert. So after dinner that night, my parents were leaving the next day, Labor Day, to drive back to Rhode Island with my aunt and uncle. So that night after dinner, my parents are walking me back to my dorm. And have you ever had a moment and known that it was a moment? You know what I mean. There were these big M moments and small M moments. I mean, the big M moments are those moments in our lives when we are actually aware and conscious that we are having a moment. It's like the universe is saying, hey there, hello, pay attention here to this is big. But more often we have more of the small M moments when we don't really know that something major or transformational is occurring. And it's not until years later that we finally realize what had happened. It's at that moment of recognition that we finally feel, that we know that we missed something important, and it hurts. God, it hurts. And I think that's where regrets come from not recognizing those small, important moments, from missing them. Anyway, this was a big M moment, and I think they felt it too. So we left the restaurant, and we're walking down Michigan Avenue, and we get to the National Shrine, and we make a turn, and we turn onto 4th Street. And it's that long street with all of the tall trees that sort of reach up and touch overhead. And there are lamplights that are casting a warm glow on the sidewalk like candles. The air's warm, but not as warm as it had been during the day. And so we're just walking, making small talk or no talk at all, and till we get to about the halfway point, and I stop and I say to my parents, I think I can go on the rest of the way alone, on my own. I mean, what I was saying was like, yeah, sure, I can walk another 200 or 300 feet to my dorm, but what I was really trying to say was that I can go forward now, on my own. I mean, after living at home for 23 years, I was finally going to be on my own. Yes, I was going to be living with other students in a dorm, but it would be my own home, 400 miles away and on my own. And they had prepared me for this. They had helped me to become the young man who was ready for these steps, who was ready for this moment. We hugged. I hugged my mom, and I hugged my dad. And I said, thank you for everything. I want to say, I said, I love you. And maybe I did, I don't remember. That's the thing with these moments. You know, when you look back at them, you don't really remember what it is that you said. And you want the moment to be perfect, as if it were a scene in a movie, even if it wasn't perfect in real life. I know, I said, I'll call you tomorrow night when you get home. Good night, Ma. Good night, Dad. And then they turned. And they walked, hand in hand, back the way we had all just come, down that long, tree-lined street with a warm lamplight. And I watched them. And I thought to myself that my life was going to be different from this point forward. A new path taken, a change happening. That the future, my future, was going to be in every step I took away from them. And so at that point I turned and I began to walk towards my dorm, and then I stopped. And I turned back for one last look. And I watched as they continued down the street and then turned the corner and then were no longer in my sight. And then I turned and went on to my new home. I cried then. Oh, nothing would ever be the same again, and I cried hard tears because that part of my life, a major part of my life, from my first memories of my brother crawling on the kitchen floor to that moment at 23, I mean, all of that was coming to an end. I mean, yes, I was turning a page in my book of life. A new chapter was beginning, an old chapter was ending. I was happy, I was excited, I was scared and eager for all this change, but at the same time, nothing would ever be the same again, ever. It's been so hard. It is hard for me to face the end of things because nothing will ever be the same again, ever. Anyway, those were the years at Catholic. Whenever I spoke about my father, it was always in the past tense. I would talk about him. I would say to my classmates, oh, my father said, or my father did, or he was. And one day, someone said to me, when was it that your father passed? And I was stunned. I was like, he's not dead, he's alive. And they said, well, whenever you talk about him, it's always in the past tense, so I thought I would ask. And that really stopped me, and I thought about it, and I realized that I did speak about my father in the past tense. And so I began to examine my thoughts and my feelings. And I finally came to see my father not as someone who I was intimidated by or was afraid of, but I began to see my father as an individual, as a man with a wife and 2 sons and extended family, a man who had made choices in his life, some of which had left him bitter and angry. I mean, my father wanted his life to be so much different than how it turned out. His mother died when he was 17. It wasn't until years later, actually 1997, when I was studying classical acting at RADA in London, that I finally came to understand my dad. Or at least that early part of his life in a really profound way. I was 39 and I was studying and living in London. It was a dream come true. I was studying classical acting, Shakespeare at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. I mean, these were the same halls that Alan Rickman, that Kenneth Branagh, that Derek Jacobi had walked down and studied in. I had to go to New York City to audition to get in. They only took 32 people for the 8-week class, 16 men and 16 women. I was so proud and humbled to have been chosen. I remember it was one weekend. It was a Sunday, and I decided to go off and explore a new part of the city over by the American Embassy. So as I was walking through the park, I noticed all these monuments, all these memorials to American soldiers who had served in World War II. I mean, they had gone over early to fight with the British, to fly for the Royal Air Force. This was before the United States entered the war in 1941. So as I was walking through the park and reading the inscriptions on all these memorials, my father's stories about his youth and his stories about the war, they all sort of came rushing in like a flood, and it was like, oh my God. Why hadn't I ever seen it before? It explains so much. My dad's mom died in 1942. My grandfather remarries a younger woman with an illegitimate daughter by another man. And she is harsh and cruel to his first wife's children, his children. My father, he enlists as soon as he can in 1943, and off he goes to war. 19 years old, getting on a ship right out of boot camp to sail across the sea to go to Europe. He was a medic. He served in England and France and Germany. What struck me was that those are the formative years. I mean, at least they were for me in terms of coming to terms with my identity and moving to D.C. He was living on his own in the midst of war, away from home. I began to imagine what that must have been like. The independence, the responsibility, the confidence, the self-assurance of being your own person. I mean, my father always said that after the war, he had wanted to stay in the Army. He was a sergeant. But in that last year of service, 1945, 1946, he began to get letter after letter from home, from my Auntie Terry, his older sister, telling him about how his younger brother, my Uncle Benny, was being mistreated by their stepmother. She pleaded and pleaded with him in every letter. So finally, in the spring of 1946, he returned home to that house that he had left 3 years earlier to be a buffer, a protector for my uncle. My father fought almost daily with his father and his stepmother. My father worked for my grandfather, actually. My grandfather was in construction, and my father became a master carpenter, which he did until he retired. And then I thought of my mother. Born in Knightsville, raised in Knightsville, graduated from Cranston High School, worked in Providence. I mean, the only time she had ever left Rhode Island, before my parents' honeymoon in 1956, was to take a road trip with my Auntie Lena and my Uncle Johnny out to Kansas to see my mother's nephew, my cousin Frank. He had been drafted for the Korean War. My Auntie Lena, she was 18 when my mom was born, and a few years later, she had gotten married and had my cousin Frank. I mean, back in those days, families had lots of children. So now I began to see and understand some of the tension in their relationship. I mean, my father had left home, a home with sad memories and the cruel presence of the proverbial evil stepmother, and he went off to war. My mother lived in Cranston except to work in Providence. My father had wanted to move so many times during their marriage, first to Florida and then later to Las Vegas, but my mother wouldn't go. So when I was living in D.C., during those years, whenever I came home, my father would share with me these stories about his life, about the choices that he had made or felt he'd been prevented from making. I mean, he made them all for good reasons. He'd made all these choices for his family. I mean, first for my aunt and uncle, and then later for me and Mark and my mom, but somehow those choices left him feeling angry and resentful over what might have been. I mean, so all that was going through my head that Sunday afternoon in the park in London with the memory of all those World War II soldiers shining in the afternoon sun. So those stories that my father told me of his early life, of those years in the war, I mean, they would help me. They would help guide and inform me when it came time for me to decide to make my decision to move to San Francisco in 1989. Next paragraph. In 1989, Frank left D.C. to move to San Francisco, arriving in time for the earthquake that fall. It was his 1-month anniversary of having moved to the city, and he always counted himself a native Californian after that. He served as regional advocate for the U.S. Small Business Administration for over 3 years till his return to Rhode Island in November 1993. 1989. Oh, boy, that was a big year. Talk about moments. It all began with my telling my parents over the Christmas New Year's break that I was going to be quitting my job and moving out to California. Then I left D.C. in April. I traveled to Europe on my own for 10 weeks, my grand tour. I came home in July. About a week after I came home, my Auntie Lena died. Then I moved to San Francisco in September, and then the earthquake in October. It had been in the previous fall, the fall of 1988, the lobbying firm that I worked for had contributed so much money to all the GOP candidates in that fall's election that at one of the fundraisers I went to, I had my picture taken with the president, Ronald Reagan. I mean, by that point in time, I had really soured on the GOP in general and really disliked Reagan. But still, to have your picture taken with the president, it was a big deal. It was an even bigger deal when I got the photo back from the White House and it had been inscribed to Frank Toti, best wishes, Ronald Reagan. Inscribed and signed. I mean, most likely it was an auto pen, but still. You know, it felt to me like a sign, an affirmation that my time in D.C. was complete. Mission accomplished. So I had the photo of me and the president framed, and I gave it to my parents as a gift that Christmas. It meant a lot to me, and I know it meant a lot to them. I mean, it's still hanging on the living room wall at the beach house. But as the Bible says, giveth with one hand, taketh with the other. It was as I was presenting my parents with this signed picture with the president that I was informing them of my desire to leave my job and move to California. I told them that I felt that I had accomplished a great deal in my life up to that point at the age of 32, that I had, risen to a level that some people strive their whole lives to achieve. How arrogant that sounds to me now. Particularly in light of the fact that some of those friends from those early DC days, I mean, one of them is the senior vice president for Yum Brands. They own KFC and Taco Bell. Another one is the president of the National Association of Broadcasters. And a third is the deputy director general of the World Trade Organization in Geneva, Switzerland. Anyway, I told them that what I've achieved up to this point in my life, it's been for me, but it's also been for you. Everything that I have accomplished, I've done for you. It's been for me, but I've wanted to make you proud of me. I wanted to fulfill your expectations of me. It was a way for me to say thank you for everything that you've done for me. But now it's my time to fulfill my own expectations. It's time for a change. And my new home is going to be in San Francisco. What I didn't tell them was that for that last year in D.C., the political life in D.C. had turned really nasty and personal. I mean, it was getting harder for me to live sort of straight by day and gay by night. I mean, I was working for a conservative business organization in a town dominated by a conservative administration whose positions and policies were so harmful and hurtful to the gay community. I mean, I was struggling to really find the balance in my life. I mean, when I first moved to DC, it was like I was sort of stepping out of the closet into the world. But after I had lived there for a number of years, after college, after working on the Hill, and then later as a lobbyist, I came to realize that I was still living in a closet of sorts. I mean, it was certainly much bigger. It encompassed a whole city. I mean, I had a wonderful circle of gay friends. I lived in a great gay neighborhood. I had had 2 serious gay relationships. But somehow, I had run up against the invisible wall of DC's tolerance, at least in the political world in which I worked. And so, having become comfortable with myself as an adult gay male, of being happy and comfortable, I wanted to just be me all the time, 24/7. I didn't want to be straight by day and gay by night anymore. I didn't want to just be myself just for a part of each day. I had a very dear friend, Michael, in D.C., who went to business school in Spain. Michael was a double major at Emory University. He double majored in poli-sci and Spanish. I remember it was 1985 or 86, he had been accepted at this very prestigious business school in Barcelona. So I had asked him at the time, why did he decide to go back to school? I mean, why did he decide to go to Spain when there were certainly lots of MBA programs right here in the DC area? And he said to me, sometimes you have to leave a place to stay the same, to stay true to yourself. I remember thinking at the time when Michael left DC, I didn't know if I agreed with that. But that thought, it has come back to me every time that I have had to make a decision whether to stay or leave a place. Anyway, when I came back from Europe that summer, my Auntie Lena passed away. She had been like a second grandmother to me after my Nani died. I mean, she and my Uncle Johnny, they lived right next door to us. My father had built their house first and then ours. She had had a stroke in February of 1989, and I remember seeing her for the last time in April before I left for Europe. She was sitting in a chair at the Cedar Crest Nursing Home. She was sitting in a straight-back chair in their sunroom. Half of her head had been shaved away where they had operated to relieve the pressure. I don't remember her saying anything, just sitting, staring. When I came back from Europe in July, my mom told me that she wasn't doing well and it was only going to be a matter of time. About a week later, the phone rang. My father answered it. It was my Auntie Nancy saying that Auntie Lena had died. That was the second time I saw my father cry. Later that summer, we went out to breakfast. It was before I moved to San Francisco. My dad and I, we went out to breakfast, just the 2 of us. I mean, we were all living at the beach house in Narragansett. It was Mark's house. I mean, he rented it out during the school year to students, and then we all lived there in the summer. So that morning, I asked my dad to breakfast, and we went down the road to a little diner called the Home Plate. It was one of the few times in my life where I asked my dad for his advice and his blessing. I don't know, from a young age, it's always been such an important thing for me to have my parents' blessing. I don't know if it was because of all the hazing and the bullying growing up, or from the invisible wall that grew up from being closeted, but having their approval, their blessing, it's important to me. That conversation that we were having that morning, it was a continuation of the one that we had started at Christmas time. I was trying to explain to my dad, I was trying to tell him why I felt the need to move to San Francisco. I said to him, Dad, I admire you. I admire everything that you have done for your family, for Mom and Mark and me. But I also know that the choices that you have made have left you angry over the things that you weren't able to do. I know I'm taking a risk, Dad, but I know that I have to reach for that brass ring. How many times will I have this opportunity? I have to try. Do you think you're the only one who's ever tried? Just because you want it, just because you reach for it, doesn't mean you're going to get it. Sometimes you don't get it, no matter how much you want it. But Dad, I have to try, or for the rest of my life I'll have regrets. I'll forever wish I had. Looking back, I wonder if that's how it is between fathers and sons. As sons, we look at what our fathers did and didn't do, what they would or wouldn't or couldn't do in their lives. And we make decisions to be different from our fathers. My grandfather ignored and disowned his own children by his first wife, my father's mother. He allowed his second wife, with a bastard daughter, to mistreat his children, especially my uncle, my father's youngest brother. And so my father, he committed himself to being a good dad. He worked hard every day at a hard job, providing for us. I mean, he spent years with Mark and me at weekly Boy Scout meetings, at monthly camping trips. I mean, he provided for all of our needs and so many of what we wanted, of what we desired. But in the process, he gave up so much of himself. He gave up his own needs, his own wants, his own desires. But that was how he saw his responsibility as a husband and a father. But knowing how those choices had made him so angry in his life, I vowed that I would do all that I could to make my dreams come true. Yes, it would be easier for me. I was a single gay man. I had no kids. I was only responsible for myself. But I still had to strive for those dreams. I didn't want to become an angry man filled with what ifs and regrets. Next to last paragraph. After living in San Francisco for over 4 years, Frank returned home and returned to school for a BA in theater and later an MFA in theater performance and society, both from Rhode Island College. In 1997, Frank spent the summer studying classical acting at the world-famous Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London. Shakespeare was his favorite playwright. After his MFA, Frank worked as an adjunct instructor at Rhode Island College, Roger Williams University, and Johnson & Wales University. He also collaborated with his husband, Stephen, on a number of theater projects over the years. Years ago, after my return from San Francisco, before I met Stephen, in fact, it was the winter before I went to London, I remember I was standing in my parents' dining room. I was standing in front of the dining room window, looking out into the backyard, looking out into the snow-covered yard, and wondering what to make of this part of my life. And I began to reminisce about San Francisco. I was wondering if I had made a mistake in moving back here, wondering if I was too old to start again, too old to go back to school, too old for this business of acting, which seemed to be a young person's profession. And then I thought of San Francisco. I had first made the decision to move to San Francisco when I had been out there for a business trip. I moved out there in 1989, and it was actually 2 years earlier, in 1987, that I had had a business trip. The lobbying firm that I worked for, every other year during the August congressional recess, we would have a retreat, so to speak, where we would sort of work on our legislative priorities and develop our legislative strategies for the upcoming congressional session. So the first time we did it was in 1985. And we went to Nashville, and we stayed at the Grand Ole Opryland Hotel. 2 years later, in 1987, we went to San Francisco. We stayed at the Four Seasons Clift Hotel with its world-famous Art Deco redwood room. I mean, it's this beautiful room with 30-foot-high walls and ceilings, all carved out of old-growth redwood trees, and it has these beautiful reproductions of Gustav Klimt paintings, one of them being The Kiss. I remember arriving in San Francisco at night. Several of us had traveled together and flown across country together on the same flight, and so we took a limo to the hotel. I mean, it was as cheap as a cab with all four of us sharing. And so it's night, and as we're driving in, I remember seeing all of these really high hills and the light from thousands of houses twinkling. It was really dark, and the twinkling of the houses sort of melted right in with the stars, so you didn't really know where the land ended and the sky began. And then as we came along another corner, there was the moon. It was just rising over one of those hills. It was a crescent moon. It was so close and so big. And then we came around another corner past Candlestick Park, and there it was, the city, in the distance, all aglow. The kingdom at the end of the rainbow, the Transamerica Tower, was all lit up like a beacon, calling me to my new home. It might be miles beyond the moon. Oh, all week I felt like that. Everywhere I went, the city was alive. Chinatown, with dead ducks hanging in the window, ready to be made into soup. Cappuccino in the Italian neighborhood at North Beach, with olive oil bottles, cans stacked high in the windows underneath hanging salamis and other cured meats. An Irish coffee at the Buena Vista Cafe at Fisherman's Wharf after the cable car ride over from Union Square. I remember on the ride at every intersection, the clanging, clanging, clanging of the cable car bells as we passed each intersection and we came down the hill, and then we arrived at the bay and the Golden Gate Bridge. I mean, Egypt has the pyramids, and Rome has the Colosseum, and Paris has the Eiffel Tower, but San Francisco has cable cars and the Golden Gate. And it was as I was standing there on the Marina Green. It was just over the hill from Fisherman's Wharf, and it used to be the landing pad for the airport, the runway, in the 1920s. And it was as I was standing there and looking back at Russian Hill, and then Nob Hill, and then Pacific Heights, and then Sausalito right across the bay, and Alcatraz right in the middle of the bay, and always the Golden Gate. It was as I was taking in all this beauty in my eyes and my heart, I knew if I ever left DC, this is where I would come to live. And as I stood there taking this all in, there was another tug at my heart. I could feel this underlying sadness. I could feel the weight of so many deaths, so much sorrow and sadness from AIDS. The city was ground zero along with New York City. I mean, it didn't scare me, and somehow it just made the city more real, that in the midst of all this beauty and the joy of living here, there was also all this sadness and pain and sorrow from AIDS. I didn't quite put it together in those words yet at that time. It would be a while. It would only after I had lived there for 4 years. If that hadn't been if that hadn't sealed the deal, it was the several days that I stayed on after my conference was over that really clinched it for me. I mean, during my conference, I mean, we didn't have time during the day to go sightseeing. We were in business meetings all day. We had a few evenings free for dinner, but it was after it was over, I stayed on for 3 more days, and I began to explore a little bit on my own. I remember staying at a gay bed and breakfast in the Castro. And one day I rented a car and I took a road trip. I went out to Muir Woods. The 300-foot tall, 1,500-year-old coastal sequoias. I mean, I felt like I was in the presence of creation, of God. It was like walking in an outdoor cathedral with these tall trees, their branches so high in the sky. And then I continued on. I continued north to a beach called Point Reyes. It was about an hour and a half north of San Francisco. I mean, the day was it was a cold day. It was a gray day. I mean, the sky was gray, the sea was gray. It was just gray and cool. I remember Dvorak's New World Symphony was playing on the cassette player in the car. I mean, there were hardly any cars on the road, and the road hugged the coast. So, I mean, if you made one mistake, over the edge you would go, hundreds of feet down to the ocean. So, as I was driving, I just began to feel that it was as if I were at the beginning of the world. That it was, a new world beginning. And as I was driving off to my left, out to the ocean, these white lights began to just power their way through these heavy, dark, gray clouds, bursting, beaming white lights that just illuminated and turned this gray sea into green. I mean, these streaks of light just cut through all the grayness. And at the same time, there were cymbals and horns from Dvorak's New World Symphony. I just pulled right over. I stopped the car and I just looked out at the ocean and saw these lights just power their way through, illuminating the sea and the sky. And it was like this awe and this majesty came over me. And it felt like God saying, "Let there be light." And there was light. And that light that was there illuminated not just the sea and sky, but my heart and my mind and my body and my soul. It was then that I knew that I would move to San Francisco. I didn't have a job when I moved to the city. I had a lot of hope and determination. And I had two friends who I had met about a year earlier. Craig worked for a U.S. senator who I lobbied, and he was his staff aide dealing with small business issues. So we got along. We hit it off. And as I had an expense account, I invited Craig to lunch, and we came out to each other, and we became friends. And then later, he introduced me to his husband, Michael, or our partner at the time, rather. And Michael was older, and he was a bartender. So, interesting enough, in the fall of 1988, both Craig and I both had decided that we were going to be leaving D.C. I mean, I knew that I was going to be moving to San Francisco after traveling to Europe, and Craig was applying to law schools, and one of the law schools was in San Francisco. So in April, when I was getting ready to leave, Craig hadn't heard yet from the schools that he had applied to, so he didn't know where he was going to be. When I got back in July, I called Craig, and he told me that he was going to be going to the University of San Francisco. Well, you can imagine my relief knowing that when I moved there in September, I would already have two friends there. So I stayed with Craig and Michael for about 10 days when I first moved out there while I was looking for an apartment. I had said to Craig, I had reminded him of that old adage about fish and guests. I wanted to make sure that we had remained friends after staying with them. So with Craig's help, I was introduced to someone who knew someone, and I found myself in the fourth floor of a 1940s apartment building. It was a studio apartment with bright lights and windows that looked out over Twin Peaks and Alta Plaza Park. And from those windows, I would spend hours watching the fog roll in, soft white clouds just sort of pouring over the hills, cascading over the streets and the houses until everything was obscured and like an impressionist painting, everything sort of twinkling and slightly out of focus. I remember I had been in the building about 2 weeks when a neighbor came up to me and welcomed me to the building and said I had to go up to the roof deck. I just had to go up there. Well, I mean, I made note of it, but I was really focused on getting a job. I mean, in those first couple of weeks, I only had about $11 in my pocket, but I never lost hope. Soon after, I actually was able to sign up with a temp agency. So now I had a job. I had an income. I could relax. And then I remembered about the roof. So one day after work, I went up. I climbed up to the 6th floor, and then I followed the stairwell up one more flight till I got to the roof. I unlocked the door, and I stepped out. In front of me, there were apartment buildings. At the top of Washington Street, there was just the tip of the Transamerica Tower. And then as I continued to look, there were more apartment buildings. And then there was the local hospital a few blocks away. And as I continued to walk, there was Fillmore Street heading south towards Haight-Ashbury and the Castro. And then the same view of Twin Peaks that I had from my own windows and this expansive sky. And I thought to myself, they were excited about all this? So I continued around past the heating unit on the top of the building and then past the elevator shaft. And then I stopped. My jaw dropped. My eyes began to fill with tears. There, across the street, rising above the building across the street, there was the Golden Gate Bridge. I mean, it was so big and so close, I could reach out and touch it, along with a slice of the bay where it met Marin. I mean, it was like Christmas and New Year's and the 4th of July, my birthday, all rolled into one. There was fireworks and explosions. My home. This is my home. And that's where I would live for the next 4 years, till my heart told me it was time to come back to Rhode Island. So all that was going through me that winter afternoon, standing in my parents' dining room, looking out the window, all those thoughts and feelings and emotions. As I looked out at the still young chestnut trees, my father had put wooden poles on either side of their slender trunks, like training wheels on a bicycle, so that they wouldn't break and bend in the midst of the winter winds and snows. And I thought to myself, I can be happy here. Here I can make a life for myself. I can settle here. I can settle here. Settle here. San Francisco had made that all possible. I mean, it was only at the end of my time in the city that I came to realize that San Francisco really is a city of dreams, and that you are granted one wish, and that my wish had been to just become fully and completely me. I mean, I had wanted to find love and a career. I mean, so many of my friends had found partners, but no matter how many men I dated or tried to date, nothing ever came of it. But then I realized that the one wish, the one that was truly deepest in my heart, was just to become me. Fully and completely me, fully out and fully me. And that wish, that dream, I did achieve. And with that gift, I was able to overcome my biggest fear, coming out to my parents, which I was able to do one summer's day in August of 1992. It was the summer of hate. The GOP convention was in Houston that summer, and I happened to be home the same week that it was on. And the night before, I was going to sit down with my parents. Pat Buchanan addressed that convention. He gave them his speech of hate. He told the assembled crowd that it is time for a culture war here in America. The amoral members of the lesbian and gay community, they are the enemy. They are an abomination to God, and they are tearing the heart out of America. So, this was the backdrop to my sitting down with my parents the following day. I had only come to the point about 6 months earlier when I knew in my heart that I could tell my parents who I truly was, and that I was ready to accept whatever they said, however they reacted. I was ready. A friend of mine in San Francisco, Lee, she worked with me at the SBA. Miss Lee, as I called her. She was from South Carolina, and she was an evangelical Christian. So Miss Lee, she helped me. She helped me prepare by telling me that there were going to be questions. There were going to be so many questions that my parents would want the answer to, or so many questions that they wouldn't even think or know to ask, but would want the answer to later. So I should try to anticipate all their questions and be able to answer them when I spoke to them. And so that's what I did. On a Thursday afternoon, around 2:30, my mother and father sat on opposite sides of the dining room table, and I sat in the middle. Somehow that just seemed to be appropriate for my relationship to each of them. Somehow I always felt like I was in the middle. Anyway, I said to them that my job was going to be coming to an end and that I have a decision to make. I have a decision whether or not to move back to Rhode Island. And while I would like very much to come back here, there's something that you need to know about me before I could even consider doing that. I'm gay. I want you to know that my being gay is as natural as my having brown eyes and curly hair. I want you to know that my being gay has nothing to do with anything that you did or didn't do. My being gay is natural. God made me. I am a child of God. And I want you to know that I'm healthy. I am not sick. This was something my friend Miss Lee said that my parents would want to ask but would be afraid to ask. Having lived now on my own for so many years, the last 4 in San Francisco, the only way that I can come home is for you to know who I truly am. They didn't ask any questions. My mother stared down at her hands or looked at me. My dad, he kept his focus on the screwdriver that he kept turning over in his hands because he had just come in from puttering around outside. I asked them if they had had any suspicions. My mother said, no. When you stopped talking about girls, I thought you had just decided to devote yourself to your career. I had a little inside chuckle there at that moment. And then my father said, you are our son. We love you. And you always have a home here. And then my mother got up, and I went to her, and I gave her a hug. And for the first time in my life, my mother hugged me back. I mean, not to say that she hadn't ever hugged me before, but my mother was always kind of stiff about that type of physical contact. But this time, there was no tension in her. There was just a warm, embracing hug. As I said, I had no expectations of how they would react. I was ready to accept however they did. But this, my mother's hug, and then my father's, we love you. You are our son, and you always have a home here. It was beyond my wildest dreams and expectations. I mean, I couldn't have scripted it better if it were a play or a movie. So now, I had my parents' blessing. So now I could come home. And I did just that the following Thanksgiving. So as I stood at that window, staring out into the backyard, I knew that I can be happy here. Here I can make a life for myself. I can settle here. I can settle here. I know a place where dreams are born, and time is never planned. It's not on any chart. You must find it in your heart. Never, never land. It might be miles beyond the moon, or right there where you stand. Just keep an open mind, and then suddenly you'll find never, never land. You'll have a treasure if you stay there, more precious far than gold. But once you have found your way there, you will never, never grow old. So come with me where dreams are born, and time is never planned. Just think of lovely things, and your heart will fly on wings forever. In never, never land. Never, never land. Well, I guess that's it. My life has come full circle, ending where it began. 15 Grape Street, Cranston, home. Growing up in this house, I came to know that I was different. And at no point ever, even with all of the fear and struggle, at no point in time did I ever want to be straight. What I realized is that what I wanted was what everybody else could have who was straight. A home, a family, someone to love, a career, to be able to walk hand in hand with the man I love down the street in public. Just ordinary things. But to achieve that, to achieve what appeared to be extraordinary things, I had to leave my family. I had to give up my family and my home and my faith, and I had to journey for years. It might be miles beyond the moon. But those journeys, they brought me back here, home. So that those extraordinary things, a home, a family, a man I love who loves me, a career, they are now mine. Or right there where you stand, and they are just ordinary things. So who am I? A middle-aged gay man still filled with hopes and possibilities. And what is it that I have found in this accounting of my life? Memories. My memories. And they become a second life. And we live each day till it comes to pass that we pass, that we die. And then those memories will live on in our family and friends, and that becomes who we are. I mean, it's not for me to give the memories meaning. It's for those who live on after us to find the meaning in our lives, in my life. I did it for my father. I did it for my Auntie Nancy, and I will one day do it for my mother. My father. My father's passing 2 years ago took us all by surprise. I mean, he had never been ill at all in his life, or rarely. I mean, usually it was just some severe back pain from having worked in construction. He had been ill for a couple of days, and so, true to his nature, he drove himself to the hospital on that Thursday night, and they performed some tests. And after getting the results back, the staff told him that he would be staying. And he said, no, I've got to go home. I have a wife. She's an invalid. I have to take care of her. They said, well, you can call someone, but you are staying. They had found a tumor lodged between my father's gallbladder and his liver. It was malignant, and they could only hope or try to operate if they had drained all the bile that had built up. That weekend in the hospital, he turned 87. My brother Mark brought him a birthday card. I mean, normally we celebrate birthdays with a dinner and cake and chocolates, but he wasn't able to eat anything until after the procedure was performed. On Tuesday, the day after they drained all the bile, my father came down with sepsis, a blood infection. And the doctors tried to tell us delicately that it was rare at his age to survive such an infection. I mean, I had held out hope because they said that he was responding well to the antibiotics. But what they really meant was that he wouldn't be in as much pain, but that ultimately he would die. On the Wednesday night, we were all there in the hospital with him. My mom, Mark, Stephen, and me. And my father started to tell us where things were around the house. I mean, he told us where his kitty was. I mean, I thought to myself, you only say those things if you know you're going to die. But even at that point, I couldn't really accept that this was the end. As we were leaving that night, my father turned to Stephen and said, watch over him. Take care of him. And Stephen said, yes, I will. It was then that I knew, true to the end, my father was looking out for us, for me, for his family. So, my journey continues. There is still so much left to life to live. And a new step in that journey will be at the end of this month when I will cease to be a single gay man and I will marry Stephen and we will be a married couple. How extraordinarily ordinary. A home, a spouse, a life-filling career. I mean, these ordinary phrases, but within them, these extraordinary things are being accomplished that I never thought could be achieved, even though I never stopped dreaming that they could. How extraordinarily ordinary. So now my marriage will be the first step in a new journey across the bridge that leads to Neverland. I want you to know that you really are a good friend. I mean, to sit here and to listen, to really listen to my ravings, my wine-fueled ravings, my soul-fueled ravings, my baggage-fueled ravings. I know we live in a world of constantly expanding superlatives, but I guess I'm rather old-fashioned. I guess I get that from my parents, and that's a good bag to carry. So for me, good is another way of saying God with an extra helping of oh. The circle of life, oh. That life is amazing, oh. That I am ready for anything, oh. So thank you for being my good friend. That is a blessing to be truly thankful for. And now, let's eat. Salud! Thank you. Namaste.